Hello world, I'm Farsight, and this is Kerbal Space Program. We are starting a new career using the RP1 set of modifications, and on top of that I have added KOS so I can write software to control my avionics and sequence all of this stuff because, nobody at NASA ever hand flies a spacecraft. And some other add-ons that were recommended by Mike Aben in his series. The KOS work will be building on top of the Farkos work that I did a year ago, and I've kind of not looked at it since then, except for the time I've been spending tinkering with it to work out how I want to get back into it. I have cleared out all of my old craft files. I have cleared out all of my old craft specific scripts. I've got them stashed away somewhere in case I want to look at them for reference. And I think we're ready to go. What you see on the screen is KSP with all of the settings returned to default. Yow. We need to configure this for RP1. So I guess this first maybe half an hour to hour, we're going to be spending just getting the mission going. So in general, I turn off camera wobble. Cannot stand camera wobble. Drives me nuts. Sorry. Turn on advanced tweakables. And in pre-launch, I want the throttle to start out at 100%. So if I just send a craft out to the launch pad and I hit spacebar, it's got full throttle and it goes. I do want to turn on the ghosted navigation markers in the nav ball. I find that useful. On the right-hand side, there's not a whole lot to change. Depending on how I feel, sometimes I feel like I should turn persistent debris up to maximum, so I have to deal with all my debris. And then I remember that getting rid of the debris is just a matter of pointing at it and saying, you go away. Other times I think I ought to set it to 0 so we just don't have any debris. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it at the default because I don't feel strongly either way. I'm going to change the max physics delta time. By default, as you try to warp time forward, if KSP decides that it is just not able to compute the physics delta, the physics stuff fast enough, it will start increasing the time delta for its integration, which means things get less accurate. And what I have decided is that with modern processors, we probably will not hit that. On the other hand, if we do hit it, I would rather the game slow down than to have my rockets behave radically differently. So I'm going to put that down to minimum. I would love to put it all the way down to 10 milliseconds. 20 milliseconds is as good as we can do. The rest of this is default. Graphics. When you reset KSP entirely, it changes to a window at 720p. And I want a window at 1080p because I am doing recordings for YouTube at 1080p. So 1920 by 1080. I am using dash pop-up window in my startup script. So this is a window with no decorations, and hopefully it will fit exactly on the monitor I've got configured for 1080p. I'm not going to go full screen. I'm going to leave the rest of this default, except I am going to turn the frame limit back down. My monitor is 60 hertz. I don't see any reason to run KSP with more than 60 frames per second. I'll leave the rest of these alone. We do require the terrain shader to be turned up to ultra for RP1. What else do I want to do here? Conic patches. Let's run all the way out to 6 conic patches. And always show closest approach for target. So even if we are quite far away, even if the normal logic for closest approach says this is not interesting, I would rather have the marker there and as a player ignore the marker than maybe be curious as a player about where my closest approach is and not have a marker at all. Audio. Currently, I have the game turned down in OBS. I am going to turn the music all the way down to 10%. This is a compromise. I often turn the music down or all the way out when I am recording videos. If I'm anticipating doing a lot of edits where I have shortcuts that I'm editing together, the background music from the game will be very distracting as you jump from halfway through this measure to the beginning of that measure. Boom! The rhythm is all wrong, and the music just doesn't work. My music appreciation is such that when you do that, it's kind of like painting a big red X across the screen that stays there for a second. It's just a big jolt to me. So music goes down. I think I'm going to be doing this in long cuts. So if I've got like a 5-minute cut and I'm going to fade to an hour later, I will fade everything out to a placeholder screen and fade it back in, and the music will fade out and back in too. Input I'm leaving unchanged. Controllers I'm leaving unchanged because I'm not using a controller yet. So we're going to apply, and that went to the proper size, and the sound went to the proper thing. I can turn up the game sound in OBS again. There we go. So the idea is that the music stays low from the game, but I want all the sound effects to be normal. And we're going to accept. Now we have configured Kerbal Space Program properly, and now we're going to set the difficulty levels for the game. And before we start this, I want to bring up the tutorial for RP1. So KSP RP1 Wiki is over on GitHub, and it has some really good tutorial stuff. It doesn't go very far in, but it's stepping through building a sounding rocket and building a downrange rocket and upgrading the sounding rocket and getting through a bunch of things. So it's useful to actually follow it. I tried to play the game a bit without it, and I faffed about quite a bit, and I missed some important things. I will try to draw attention to the things that I remember missing as we go through. So this is the early career tutorial. And we are going to start with new RP1 career settings. Okay, difficulty settings. Well, actually, it starts off by repeating what we just did, some of it. The tutorial does make a point of saying, please set your default throttle to 100%. And other than that, it doesn't do much to the game settings. We are going to start game. Start new. I have a custom flag, which I am going to use. The fact that it's black, that's not pirate black, that's space black. Thank you. It always has been. So, difficulty. RP1 is tuned around the normal difficulty. That said, they do recommend, I'm not sure whether it's in the tutorial or in the YouTubers that I've watched. Basically, if you haven't played RP1 before, and I've only played a little bit of RP1, set this to easy. Go easy on yourself. It's just that much better. So, what are the things that they recommend? The tutorial says in Kerbalism 2, players report getting spammed with out-of-EC messages from their probes. I remember making a lot of probes in Kerbal Space Program that would basically occasionally wake up with some electric charge. They would do things until they ran out of electric charge, and then they would go to sleep until they, got to somewhere else where they might turn on again. If I'm going to be doing that here, I don't want to be spammed with electrical charge. I can turn this off per vessel, but let's start with it turned off. I'll turn it on vessels where I care. Okay, realism overhaul. Tutorial mentions that this controls basically what engines are available. And there are a bunch of operational engines, a good selection of operational engines. Then there's some prototype engines, which in real world, they were tested, but they weren't actually flown. And I think it is viable to say, I'm going to do a realistic space program where maybe I make some different choices and I use some of the the ones that were only prototypes in the real world. Concept, I've seen some pretty wacky concept stuff out there. There are a number of interesting bits of hardware that made it to a paper design study or a mock-up, but they're just, I'm sorry, they're not really viable. Speculative extrapolations of historical designs. Now we're getting into, not really sure I should allow these. Alt history, that could be fun. Once you really know RP1, you're bringing in a whole bunch of new stuff, but you know how the basic stuff works, and you can look at the new parts and say, this is how this part is different, and this is what makes it interesting. And sci-fi, that's definitely for I am an expert in RP1, I'm going to have some fun. So we are going to run our program using operational and prototype parts only. Now, we're not going to show deprecated parts. Next thing the tutorial says is under RP1, this one right here. When you open the window for a part, if it's got procedural avionics, this automatically opens the procedural avionics window, which is big. It takes up quite a lot of the screen. I normally play on a 4K screen, just, when I'm playing for myself. We're recording 1080p for YouTube. I capture way too much footage, so until I get a 16 terabyte mass storage online here, which I may do someday, I'd really rather not be capturing footage at 4K. So we're capturing footage at 1080p. The avionics window takes up too much real estate on a 1080p window. I'll bring it up when I want it. I wish there was also a check mark here for whenever I bring up one of these windows and it has sections that I can collapse. I'd like it to default to collapse all the sections so I can go through and open one section at a time and do what I want to do in the sections I want to open. Test flight. These two options. The tutorial even says, keep in mind that most players do not use these settings, as they can be quite hard/unfun. Launchpad failures make it so engines can fail to ignite on the ground, to punish particularly unreliable rockets with several engines in the first stage, and high dynamic pressure penalty means lighting an engine under high Q, aka air pressure from flying fast in air, very difficult. I forgot to turn this off in an earlier playthrough, and as a result, fully 60% of my WAC Corporal launches experienced failure to ignite the Aero Bee because I was moving too damn fast. Turning that off. Because yes, I am using my avionics to light the Aero Bee once we are off. So we're using the solid rocket boosters to get us off the launch pad, and then we're lighting the next stage until we get rid. If you've got a booster under a rocket like this, if the upper stage starts burning and the lower stage is still present, you get no thrust from it because it's just wasted. At least that's real world. And the tutorial mentions this as well, in that you don't get any thrust from your Aero Bee until the Tiny Tim has been ejected. So my code is going to wait until the booster's thrust has fallen off, and then we're going to light the liquid engine, and then we're going to disconnect the booster and let it fall away. That means we're going to be lighting this liquid-fueled engine at a fairly high velocity. So leave that off. Now I added KOS, so the tutorial is not going to know about this. We want to configure KOS. I also added Blizzy Toolbar, so we're only going to use Blizzy Toolbar from KOS. And we are going to increase the instructions per update to 2000. This is more compute power for the early space program than the early space program had. So I am going to make an effort to keep my control code very simple until I hit the kind of space hardware that was flown in the mid-70s. So once we start going to the moon, I will start trying to increase the complexity of my code to match the kind of control code you had on the Apollo missions. And as we move forward, when we get to where we are in 80s technology, since that's where I really started my career in software engineering, I know very well what kind of things we could do there. And 2,000 instructions per physical step update is way under what we could do. And even with space-rated processors, we will very quickly, as we reach out to interplanetary missions, get to where the spacecraft have a lot more capability. And I think I can address that if I want to set the complexity of my KOS code to be similar to what I expect an interplanetary craft has. Mind you, I haven't worked on interplanetary craft, so I don't know for sure, but I can look at the complexity of the problems faced by getting a spacecraft from Earth orbit to Mars orbit, the delays involved, and how much smarts need to be on the other end, and can estimate. I may need to have multiple KOS cores working in parallel, and I'm hoping that this instructions per update is instructions per update per core. So all CPUs run at a speed that executes up to this many KRISC opcodes per physics tick. Idea. This is the speed of the KRISC operations might be something that you start out with running slow, and as you do research, maybe your processors get faster. Just an idea. I know nobody is working on this. I'm also starting to think about what kind of software infrastructure I want to use in KSP2. We've got Control System 2, which is great. I've messed with it a bit, but I have some thoughts about a completely different engineering paradigm for KSP2. And we'll get into that in a separate series if I decide I want to start writing mods for KSP2. We'll see about that. The thing to chew on, if you want to think about it with me, is analog. Okay? So think fluidics. Think, if in the advanced case, think photonics. Think analog computing, where you're not setting up a list of digital instructions, but you're setting up, we have a value here, and we're going to do things like differentiate it, or integrate it, or multiply it by something, or add values. We're going to compare with thresholds. We're going to change the valves based on what the value of a particular signal is. So anyway, that's getting way off topic, but still, we haven't started our game here yet, so I'm comfortable doing that. Anyway, so that's my digression, which I fortunately only did while we were configuring KOS. So that's our difficulty. We're going to accept what we've got. Nothing else is going to change. We do have Blizzy Toolbar installed because without it, there's just a huge number of buttons across the bottom of the screen. We've got a toolbar controller that lets us move icons back and forth. And unfortunately, we have a whole lot of add-ons whose icons cannot be moved to the Blizzy toolbar. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Anyway. Save name is RP-1. RP-1, career. I am going to check this, and it says now is the time to poke the button. Let's go do it. Start. And we are expecting some pop-ups. Although, because I have played previously, some of the add-ons may have already stashed their pop-up state in a game-specific area, so we might not get all the pop-ups they talk about. And indeed, the only pop-ups we get are the main pop-up that RP1 gives you at the beginning of every career, which basically gives you a checklist of how to get started, and the KOS pop-up, which is going to be selecting the connectivity manager. And I am going to demand that my KOS code running on the processors on the vessels can only access the main archive at the ground station if we actually have a telemetry link. So we're going to use the ComNet. Okay. So if one of our vessels doesn't have connection to center and it tries to boot, it is going to have some problems because under Farkos, the first thing you do is you import your modules, which is it's going to be looking for those modules on the archive. So it's going to come up and it's going to start running its little boot code. And the first thing its boot code does is it says run std.ks from the archive. And it's going to say, I don't have a connection to the archive. So your onboard processor is just going to sit there doing nothing until you get your radio back. This is going to be a bit of a challenge. We will have to make sure that we keep our comm nets going, or I will have to have some spacecraft that have standalone software on board that doesn't reference the archive. Maybe code that says if we have archive capable, then we're going to go do the archive thing. If we don't have archive capable, we fall back to this dumb mode. Okay, tutorial. Settings. RP1's first greeting with you, yada, yada, yada. You can't see anything because it's nighttime. Oh, I'm going to dismiss this. The tutorial will actually step us through these steps. So it is very dark out there. I have the brightness adjusted. I'm in a kind of a fairly interesting lighting situation here, so I tend to have my monitors not quite bright enough. I tend to have to increase brightness in games. We want to do a little bit of ambient light boosting here. Settings. So we scroll down. Let's take a look at the rest of these. We could adjust our music volume from here if something were wrong with it. Video and graphics. We have all sorts of things we can tune. But for now, I just want to turn up the ambient light boost. They recommend 11%. I'm going to go to 20%. Now, I don't notice any difference there. I literally didn't notice any difference. Settings. Video and graphics. Ambient light boost. I'm going to turn all of these all the way up. They were centered. So if I apply and accept, resume, I wonder if that only takes effect when you change scenes. Well, let's change scenes. Admin and back. So apparently ambient light boost does nothing. That's unfortunate. I was hoping to use that. Anyway, let's leave these on 20% boost. Just in case at some point it decides it's going to start doing something, we will at least have a reasonable little bit of boost going. I believe I am using a light boosting mod, which may overrule that. Community fixes, gameplay changes. I think all of this stuff is good. So down here we have real shoot settings. We have distant object enhancement. We have the visual enhancements. We're not going to mess with these. I just want to see what they are. There's a lunar transfer check. There's real antennas. We will be making use of real antennas, but we won't be diving into it very much. RP1, we're going to be spending a lot of time in this menu. Texture replacer, Kerbal alarm clock, transfer window planner, Kerbal change log. See the changes your mods have released. Okay. Scatterer, which is another visual thing. Copernicus. don't really know. The RP1 installed Copernicus, so I guess it's just kind of a thing that's there. Turtle constructs, FARC. Okay, and we have our Blizzy toolbar here, which it's remembered its settings from when I was using it before. So we are going to configure visible buttons. I think that's the one that does the brightness. Yes, minimum ambient lighting. Oops, why did it go away on me? There we go. So I can bring that up. So minimum and night, we're going to bring it up to there. And streaming mode, I don't know what it does for streaming mode. We'll save those as defaults. There we go. So now we can see things at night. Choosing a launch site. I have messed around with doing multiple launch sites, and it turns out to be a pain in the tail because you end up with one launch complex at one site, and another launch complex at another site, and you have to go back and forth between the sites. And it's like, yeah. So we're going to do everything here at Cape Canaveral in Florida. They suggest the French launch site of Kourou if you're new to Principia, and we are going to ignore that. I'm going to do it in Cape Canaveral, and we are going to try to focus on matching the United States program. That will cut the number of engines we have to look at significantly, because we can, where we have a USA engine and a USSR engine, which are kind of the same mission profile, we can just look at the US parts, and that cuts down on our decision making. Okay, starting programs. They suggest warping to sunrise here so we can actually see what's going on, even though I've got ambient light turned up. So, sunrise in Florida. Here is our administration building. And we have 3 programs available to us. And I looked at the X-Plane research, and it's all kind of, needs like a lot more moxie than I have in RP1. So we're going to defer this program until later, if we even do it. We're going to be focusing on rockets. We've got early rocket development, which is reach 100 kilometers. There is reach 140 kilometers and return safely. This is, parachuting something down. And then there's downrange 3,000 kilometers and downrange 5,000 kilometers. This is rocket development. I am going to start this, and I'm going to go do it on fast so we get a lot of money coming in. I think we can complete this by 57. The tutorial also starts these on fast, so yeah, they're suggesting you doing it on fast in the tutorial for new players, so I'll go ahead and do that. This cost us 150 confidence. We're starting out at 750. That's good. And now we can pick a second program. Suborbital research is similar. It starts out with get to the Kármán line. And then it says get a film camera up into low space. It's above 140 kilometers. Then there's get a biological experiment above 140 kilometers. And then there's get an advanced biological experiment up above 140 kilometers. So this is all straight up stuff. So this is basically better and better sounding rockets. And again, this is going to be a 6-year program because we're going on fast. So we now have 2 programs going. We're starting out with 25,000 funds, roughly. And these are going to pay out over time. So first year, we're getting basically 31.5 from each one. And that's going to go up. And the 5th year, we're going to reach our peak funding, and then it's going to start ramping back down, but we need to have it finished. Word to the wise, it gets when you start building larger rockets, things get pretty expensive. So these are not gosh wow huge numbers. These are maybe we can do it with this budget numbers. They're a little bigger than the tutorial because I'm on easy. But there we have it. So both of these start out with the Kármán line being their first contract. So now we go pick a contract. And all is literally all of the contracts available. Woo! At some point, I'm going to read all this stuff through and I'm going to put it all in a grand database so I can be really smart about which contracts I do. But yeah, look at all of these. Each one of these categories has a long list. So suborbital has that whole set of contracts. And it's not necessarily in this order. For instance, you probably will do these downrange LV development several times before you do this. These actually are semi-repeatable. Anyway, I've noticed as I was playing that sometimes I'll go back and pick up a contract and the numbers will be different. So for instance, I picked this up once and the next time I picked it up, it was at a different range. Oh no. So careful with the contracts. So to pick contracts, we're going to go to the available contracts. We see we have 2 contracts available to choose or not, to commit to or not. And we're going to commit to doing a first launch. And we are going to commit to reaching the Kármán line, which is 100 kilometers high with an uncrewed craft. And we don't need to have a parachute on it. In fact, we can blow it up once it gets to 100 kilometers. We are going to have some science on it, however. And we're not going to blow it up as long as it's going to get us science. And once we have hit the Kármán line, we're going to get 16 fame. And we're going to get 10 applicants to our space program. There we go. So we now have accepted the contracts. So we have 3 contract slots. Oh, we wanted to look at what's active. Notice that active includes a whole bunch of basic records. These are automatically assigned and they're there. And when you do them and you get back some rewards and that's it. Difference from KSP1 is when we accept the contract, we don't get an advance. That's what the programs do. You sign up for a program and it gives you it gives you funding over time. And within that funding, you hit these contracts and your completion of the contract gets you fame. And some contracts you have to complete for the program. So for instance, we have to complete Kármán line as part of our programs that we selected. So they make a good point. Never build a downrange rocket when a sounding rocket can do the job. Sounding rockets are smaller, lighter, cheaper, faster to build. And they go straight up and come down. Or sometimes they go downrange a bit and come down. Downrange rockets are like the V2. They're bigger. They are more expensive. They take longer to build. So if you need to launch a beefier rocket, do so. If you don't, use a small, cheap, fast one. For many years, I think we had a motto at NASA that was smaller, cheaper, faster. Okay, now onward. Building a sounding rocket. I'm going to break the recording here, and when we come back, we will start putting together a sounding rocket because this is a really good place for us to declare a short break. I will pick up with the sounding rockets when we come back, and until I do, you go off and you have a good time. You get your RP1 started, and we'll see how it goes.